Hello, everybody. Welcome to Jen's Pen Live, where we find interesting people who are making the world a better place and ask them to share their story. Today, we're talking to Andrae Smith Jr. That always happens to me. Okay. Today, we are talking to Andrae Smith Jr., who helps passionate coaches, healers, and movement leaders write books that transform lives. Andrae, welcome.
Hello, and thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it. I love what you do. I love being invited to be a guest on your show.
Well, I was a guest on your show, and that was so much fun. We'll have to do that again sometime.
Definitely
Today,
swapping topics.
yes, exactly. Today, we're going to talk about you, though. So I want to hear, what is your story?
Well, short version or long version? I'm kidding.
Go as long as you like. I find you very interesting, so take up all the time you need.
Well, I'll try to be relatively brief. So I was born in California in 1984. So I grew up, I used to love, so I guess a little bit about me and what I do. I am, like you said, a book coach, an editor, a writer, and I help passionate entrepreneurs and coaches and movement leaders to write their books. How did I get into this? Well, I've always had a passion for books and writing. I was that kid who could blow through the latest Harry Potter in a weekend. Like, I love books that much. I read those growing up, I read the Chronicles of Narnia, The Lord of the Rings, all the books of magic that I could get my hands on. Actually just discovered a box in my grandma's garage finally that has like my old books from way back when. So I brought them with me. I think I have an original copy, not an original with like the typos, my original copy of Harry Potter from 97. It's so old, it doesn't even have a dust jacket anymore. Although if I can ever get a hold of one with the typos, I'm not letting it go. These things are worth a lot of money these days.
Really?
Apparently. I don't know why people pay thousands of dollars for a book with typos.
I hope one day my stuff goes for that.
Right? But anyway, so I grew up writing and loving reading. And I was just really inspired to tell a lot of different stories as I was younger. So I grew up telling stories and trying to learn the craft and learn the trade as much as possible. Although at the time I didn't really as like learning the trade. I was just like, I want to tell better stories, and I'm learning what I can in English. I do really well. I understand language. So yeah, tell better stories. And that kind of carried me all the way through school. As I developed new writing skills and new vocabulary, I wrote more sophisticated, more lengthy stories. And by the time I graduated high school, I had almost completed my first bad novel. I say I finished it because I put a cork in it and said, I'm done. It's at 300,000 words and it just doesn't make a bunch of sense. So in a sense, I finished my first bad novel. Every writer's first milestone is the bad one. So that one's buried. After that, though, because I realized I joined a few different writing communities and started getting around more sophisticated writers, and I'm like, oh, yes, another kid fresh out of high school who thinks they're going to be the next Christopher Paolini with all their pretentious high school level writing. I'm like, oh.
I have quite a few of those little pieces of paper with my high school writing on them. They're hilarious.
Yeah, I saved them on a flash drive that I don't even know where it is these days. So you couldn't even ask.
Mine are on a brother word processor, so.
Well then, right? You got me beat. No one will ever see those. So I just started learning more and more from them. I hired a mentor who was really tough. Her name was Maya. And I only knew her online through one of these writing groups. And she called herself the nitpicker in chief. And she did not let up. Sent her feedback for a few different documents. And it was everything from where I put my name to the manuscript was formatted to whether or not certain phrases made sense. Even logically, it sounded pretty like, yeah, but it doesn't make sense. You didn't say anything. You're wasting all this space, wasted words. I think I sent a short section from one of my college papers when I was taking creative writing. And the first paragraph opened up with a little bit of description of the setting and the character in the setting, like typical setting the scene sort of deal. I was like, it's cold and bitter out here, nothing but gray everywhere, gray skies, gray wind. She's like, so since when did wind get a color? Like, you know what I'm saying? She's like, no, I really don't. Take it out. I'm like, okay, fine.
I know what you're saying by gray wind, right? We all have our own, it's art. We all have our own interpretation.
Right. And overall, I think I took what she was saying with a grain of salt. And I appreciate her now because
Yes.
she pushed me to think more deeply about the types of descriptions I was giving. I mean, while that one is an easy one to think of, well, we know what you're trying to get at. It's a gray, muggy day. It's cold and wet and rainy. Of
Right.
course, that's a unique way of saying that. But then there are other forms of description where we try to get creative, and we can see it in our minds and we think of words that'll fit it, but we forget that sometimes what we think makes sense does not make sense to everyone else. And
Mm-hmm.
so I started to really question, not in a negative way, like, oh my gosh, am I better? But really start to analyze what I was putting on the page. And this
Mm-hmm.
was kind of my first dip at getting into breaking down a piece of writing beyond just, is it grammatically correct? Is it spelled right? Do you use sophisticated language and whatnot? It's
Mm-hmm.
really now the elements of style and the meaning behind the style. You can write really pretty and say a whole lot of nothing.
Oh
You
yeah.
can say a whole lot of content and it can be really ugly. And so especially in fiction, you want to get that nice marriage there.
Yes.
This was really my first exposure. And to kind of cut this down a little bit, because I could talk for hours, don't get me wrong. I really started growing a whole lot more. And as I started growing and sharing more in these workshops, the people I was around were like, yeah, he's really serious about this. He's taking advice, he's asking questions, he's learning. So they started sending me different books like Stephen King's On Writing, The Art of Fiction, John Gardner, On Writing
Mm-hmm.
Well. So I got like a whole like small shelf of books that I got sent to me from these people. I'm like, yes, we want
Cool.
to see you grow. And after a couple of years, I had kind of flipped into kind of a mentorship role. I'd grown that much where I was having like sophisticated conversations with these people who've been like writing for so long.
Mm-hmm.
But there was one problem with this community. No one ever finished their books while I was in this community. They were always talking about their work in progress, their WIP.
Right.
I am tired of that phrase, WIP, because most authors in that particular group never get to the finished stage. They never get out of the work in progress, and they're writing for like years and years and years. And I'm like, I don't want to spend 20 years on the same book. Granted, some
Mm-hmm.
books can take that long, but no, I'm not doing it. So flash forward, I take all kinds of different writing and editorial classes while I'm at Arizona State for a couple of years and learn as much as I can. Switch to a career in retail because, of course, I've been told there's no money in editing. Really, you're going to go and be a journalist and work for way more hours than you can actually afford, and you'll just live as a starving artist
Mm-hmm.
with other starving artists, editors, and writers, and that's okay. I'm like, oh well, that's not quite good enough for me, so I got to pay the rent. So started a cashier, moved up to management. 5 years later, I'm like, I got to get out. This is not good.
Right.
Of course, I didn't listen to that. And so here I was working in retail, just as a manager, literally dying. I'd lost 20 pounds due to stress. And like, yeah, I did not look good. I was like, I looked sick and soulless. Like my associates were like, anyone know what happened to him? Like, he's just unhappy all the time. He just looks miserable. He talks miserable. He's angry all the time. And he looks like he's dying. And apparently I actually was. And eventually and having an anxiety attack on my way to this job. And I'm like, okay, yeah, no, I gotta go to the doctor. The doctor tells me what actually happened. And it's like, yeah, that was an anxiety attack. I'm like driving, I'm like 100 meters from the job, like getting ready to turn into the parking lot. And like I see the sign on the front of the store. I'm like, hell no. And like I was shaking, sweating, and I couldn't finish. I parked the car at the parking lot and then swooped back on out and went to the doctor. At that point, he put me on a little bit of medication. 2 days later, I getting ready to give my friend a ride to work because he wouldn't sign off on my leave of absence, but he's like, here, you can take 3 days off. I'm like, thanks,
Mm-hmm.
doc, appreciate it. He's like, he admits I was suffering from severe exhaustion and
Okay.
being extremely stressed and could probably use a lot of time off. He's like, I can get you 3. I'm like, thanks, doc. But I was driving my other friend to work to a different Walmart location, and she's supposed to be going in. She needed help getting some supplies to fix her car and all that. I'm like, okay, I'll just go and drop her off, get up the road and crash my car. I'm like, all right, I think it's a hard sign. I need to chill. Long story short there, I go back to California, my home state, sit back at grandma's house, chill out and just write. I journal, I write poetry, and it's one of those rare weeks in California where you actually get some rain. So I watch the rain through the window and I'm like, okay, what am I gonna do with my life? And I realized if I could write and edit my whole life, I'll be happy. And if people can figure out how to make valuable careers writing, I can do it too. If I can make Walmart a couple $100,000 in sales selling candy every year, I could make money writing books.
Yeah, definitely.
And so I switched to editing full time, gave them a 3-week notice, started taking small gigs and got picked up by another company. And here I am now doing it on my own. It had some restructures with COVID. And so I'm like, well, I'm not going back to retail. That's what I'm not about to do. So here I am doing it on my own, working with people I still love, trying to make a bigger difference because I'm not going back. It's forward thinking from here.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. No going back to this. But yeah, I understand what you mean by like losing your soul at jobs. That's something we all understand, I think. But I wanted to ask you, so you wrote the book Facing Racism.
Sure did.
Right there. I wanted to ask you how that came about, and well, what is it about? What is it about, and also how it came about that you wrote?
So last 2020, I was still working at the company. We had the death of George Floyd and a lot of talk in social media and on the news around social justice, racial equity, policing, and it was just everywhere. And it wasn't just George Floyd, it was Ahmaud Arbery, it was Breonna Taylor, it was Elijah McClain, all this stuff erupting into conversation because it really needed to be. And this has just kind of been a continuation of what we've seen over the last decade. Like, I think in chapter 3 or so, I list kind of some really big name, high profile cases that really don't cover all of them, but just a few.
Right.
You can see like there's one for literally almost every year since 2012. And I'm like, okay, here we go. And for every one, of course, there's another 100.
Of course.
And so I found myself having all conversations online around, what racism is and what it looks like and where it comes from and what we need to do about it. Some of it was angry conversations with people I really didn't need to engage with. Some of it was just really kind of sharing enlightened thoughts around what it was. And when I say enlightened thoughts, I mean thoughts that I actually just took the time to really ruminate on and then make a post around. And over time, I realized I'd probably written at least a good 20,000 words worth on social media alone. And at the time, I'm like, shoot, I'm about 5,000 words away from a book. So I joked with my supervisor and I'm like, I might mess around and write a book this weekend. She's like, you should. I'm like, nah. But it stuck with me. And she's like, if you do, we can probably get it published and all of that. I'm like, okay, well, I'll think about it. But I really didn't want to write in that genre. I'm not an anti-racism coach. I'm not trying to be seen as someone who's an expert in this. I didn't go to school for it. Writing. Remember, writing. I did not go to school for social justice, social equity. So I'm like, who am I to write this book? But I realized over time, like, I've got something to say and I'm saying it anyway, and I have a vested interest in saying it. The best thing I can do is meet the moment and write the book. So I sat down one Saturday, I think it was like June, I want to say. And it was like the second or third, it was like Saturday or Sunday. I'm like, all right, I think I'll go ahead and do it. I think it's worth it. And I'll see what happens in a week. So I planned it out, started writing, and I spent that whole next week just writing while also working with like 15 other authors. And that following Sunday, I think it was the 9th, June 9th, I wrapped up, and June 10th, I went to our company morning meeting and we were like, talking about stuff and anyone do anything interesting? And my boss is like, I wrote another book. And people are like, what? I'm like, yeah, I did that. I can submit it to you guys if you want. Ultimately, I ended up self-publishing because that was right around the time when they try to let some people go. But that's how the book kind of came up. As for what it's about, clearly it's about the conversations I was having and what it actually means to, not what it means to be an anti-racist, but to do this anti-racism work. What is it going to take? I went in with two major questions. One of them being, if we know racism is bad, like we universally in this country know racism is bad. No one even wants to be called a racist because they don't want to be identified as a bad person. So if we all know racism is bad, why the heck does it still exist? There's only one possible explanation, and it's that people who don't think it's bad are okay with it, and the ones who do think it's bad don't know enough to pay attention to it. They don't see it. They don't want to see it. Some of them do, and that's who this book is for, because there are those who do want to see it, because they're tired of things happening and not knowing why did this happen.
Right.
And so in this book, I try to illuminate the concepts of hidden bias and hidden prejudice. What is bias? What is prejudice from a sociological perspective? What is racism? What is needed for racism to be at play? Is there such a thing as reverse racism? How do we form our in-group dynamics with that? And where can we find like subtle examples of bias that may be innocuous, like common stereotypes, versus more dangerous ones? And how are we being influenced by our histories with family and even media messages? Because all this stuff comes into play. And as we can start to expose them, we can realize, okay, I'm not a racist person, but clearly there's some stuff going on that's seeding racist ideas into my brain that I didn't even know were racist. Cool. And now I can start to deprogram those thoughts and act differently. Because at the end of the day, the overall message of the book is that people aren't inherently bad. Everyone wants to do the right thing. Everyone wants to do good, and everyone wants to have their needs met. They have different views on what that actually looks like based on our personal stories. If we can get onto the same page and start to see each other again and have conversations respectfully, we can start to bridge the gaps. And that's kind of where this other book came from one of my authors, Aaron. It's called Bridges to Heal Us. So it kind of takes it a step further.
What's it called? I'm sorry.
It's called Bridges to Heal Us.
Oh, okay, cool.
And it kind of takes what I've done a step further.
That's awesome.
I love plugging her. I think her books are so amazing.
Let's transition into what you do then. You help people write books.
Yes. And so the short version on that, and I promise to keep this one short, is that I meet new authors, aspiring authors who are essentially coaches, experts, entrepreneurs, but primarily movement leaders, people who have a message of healing, transformation, growth, who have maybe been through something or have helped a lot of people through something and have overcome it. And now they are experts by virtue of experience, really. And, some of them are experts by virtue of actual study. And that's perfectly fine. I work with a lot of naturopathic doctors and holistic doctors who've dedicated years to studying their field. But these are people who care about the results of their work. And so they come to me and they say, I've been thinking about writing a book. I've seen all these other people writing books, and I know I've got something to say that really isn't being said yet. How do I get it done? I help them to figure out what book they should write, who they're going to write to, how to put it all together. And then, of course, how to actually get from blank page to the end, publish. And it's a fun process. It comes with a lot of learning, a lot of growth. My favorite part of the process is when they realize I never knew all went into being an author. And when they say all this, like they knew it was the writing, but they never expected like the personal transformation to come up, where they realize I have everything I'm going to say. And then I'm like, yes, go do it. And they're like, what do I say? I'm like, you know what to say. It's like, but I don't. I'm like, you don't trust yourself to say it. That's the real problem. They're like, oh, we work through a lot of the mindset stuff as they realize they have to become the author, the owner of their books. That's why I didn't want to write mine at first. I'm like, I don't want to own that. I don't want to be attached to that for its entire life. But here we are.
That's amazing. That's one of the things that I find most interesting working with authors. I mean, you and I have we're doing similar things. You're a coach and I'm a ghostwriter though, but we cater the same sorts of people. One of the things I found most inspiring about working with people and helping them write their books is the transformation they go through as they're coming up with the content and talking about what they're an expert in or whatever. They go on this journey where they, I mean, almost without fail, I will have to say, without fail, find something about themselves that they didn't know before, or are able to reconcile something that they hadn't yet. Do you find the same thing?
Absolutely, absolutely. Believe it or not, that's kind of the case with my dad's book. This is my
Yeah.
wall of wins, so I keep them close. So earlier this year, my dad and I worked on his book together. It's called What Do I Do Now? The Honest Guide to Walking in Your Purpose. And in it, we talk about his life's journey. Originally, he was thinking, an autobiography or a memoir of some sort, but he's like, it doesn't quite feel right. I'm like, well, no, it's not quite right. Who are you to write a memoir anyway, Pops? But really, we settled on a personal transformation book to help people find their purpose, because he's always been trying to answer that question. And he's found himself in various scenarios where he's like, all he can do is sit back and think, well, what do I do now? And like, there are so many people in my age bracket, and some of them old, some of them younger, who reach that point where like, well, shoot, now what? Sometimes it's for the better, and sometimes it's like something you really went all the way left and they have to do a hard reset. And so for him, as we were working on this book, he realized there were stories that he wanted to tell that, as we were talking about them, he didn't realize still held moments of pain. So like, some stories didn't make it into the book. They have to do with different family things. But as we were talking about it, there was a lot of healing for himself. And there was a lot of healing going on for the both of us, because believe it or not, I didn't grow up with my dad in the household. He divorced when I was like 2. And just the way things worked out, he was pretty much absent in a lot of ways until I was about 15. And even then, it was like, we would see each other maybe 2 or 3 times a year. And I don't know how we started to really mend that over the last handful of years, but somehow or other, after I moved from California to Arizona, now to Colorado, a whole 1,000 miles east, we've managed to build up a new relationship. And last year I went to stay with him for a little bit. And we did this together this year through Zoom. But in the time we were talking about it, like, we really built up a new bond. I'm like, oh yeah, that's my best friend right there.
That's amazing. That's wonderful. Like, that is a beautiful story. Like, that's really beautiful. The power of writing and digging deep and figuring things out, how that can bring you together with people.
Definitely, it really is. And I think, and I'll be really brief here, I think we have to remember that language is how we humans communicate. Like, every species has its own type of language, but we specifically use words as a way of linking us together. We group ourselves through common tongue. We identify in that way. We share colloquialisms within family groups and within city and regional groups. And through sharing our story, our shared stories and our shared words, we can really start to touch people in places where, unless we're willing to open up and speak or write, we really couldn't. You can look at someone and you can never know what they've actually been through. You might see someone and think, wow, they're remarkably average. And really, their great grandma might have been Queen of England.
It's true. It's true. You never know who someone is. That's wonderful. I wanted to mention too that your process it's about 30 days, right? You write a book in 30 days.
Whew. So that is not a service that I offer to my clients, because so a book is a lot of intense work. So there are a lot of people who are intimidated by a book, and they think it's a lot of work to get it done. And I'm not here to tell them that they're wrong about it being a lot of work. Books do take a lot of work. There are a lot of book coaches out there who will tell you it's easy, it's not a lot of work, you don't have to do this, this, or this. They're either going to charge you out the yin yang, or they're shortchanging you. A good quality book does take a lot of work. I won't lie there. You know this, I know this. It's just a matter of who does the work. So I don't offer 30 days. I wrote my new book, Write Your Book in No Time, in 30 days. I gave myself a 30-day challenge, because I've been having a lot of people get on these calls and we talk and they think, wow, this sounds great. This is exactly what I need, but I just don't know where I can find the time. And I'm like, is that so? And after so many calls, I'm like, I'm in school full time. I'm doing this whole solopreneur thing full time, which takes a lot of time when you're by yourself. if I can write a book in 30 days, you can't tell me if I give you a 90-day to a 3-month to 5-month track, built in foolproof system to get your book done without stress, without overwhelm, without confusion, you can't tell me you can't finish it. There is built-in time for failure. You could procrastinate a whole month and still finish on time.
That's brilliant. That's
And they're like,
brilliant.
nah. I'm like, all right,
Building
I'll
that
do it in
in.
30.
That's amazing. So you know what? I wanted to talk, and we're coming up on time. We can talk about this later. But one thing I want to discuss with you at some point is how you, because this is something we can both talk about, how you approach your talking to your client about what the book's going to be about the content, that sort of thing, and help them kind of organize that. But that's for another time because we are coming up on the end of our time together.
Well, I apologize. I talk too much. You gotta stop me sometimes.
No. It's honestly, half an hour is not long enough, but I know you need to get going. Otherwise we would talk for another half an hour.
At least writers habits, right?
Right. Seriously, we can talk. We use words. But tell people where to go to get in touch with you if they're looking to write a book. Tell them where to go.
You can find me right here on Facebook using my actual Facebook name, which I don't remember. I think it's like Author Andrae, maybe Andrae Smith Jr. Author. I will put a link to my profile in the comments under the video. But I operate right here through social media. You can also find me on Instagram using my handle at author AUTHOR.Andrae ANDRAE Smith SMITH. Either one works just fine. But if you're watching, I'm assuming you're on Facebook.
Right. Just an assumption, yes. Awesome. Okay, so that is fantastic, Andrae. All that's left is for me to thank you. Thank you for coming here and spending your time here. I know that you have a lot to do. So
well,
I really enjoyed it.
I really appreciate it. And for anyone who is watching, don't worry. Jen and I will get into all the details. We're going to have so many more conversations. This is just the beginning.
Seriously, like we're just going to go back and forth on each other's shows and having conversations about storytelling. It's going to be a little bit crazy. All right. Well, everybody else out there, thank you for joining us. Andrae, thank you for sharing this part of your story. And I just want to let people out there know that everybody has a story to tell. What's yours?